Ladies and gentlemen, we're so happy that you stayed with us on the Denise Simon Experience. I want to introduce you to Bruce Torres. He is the Director of Communications for the American Small Business League. And, there's been quite a movement here lately to certainly help out small business. And I think it all kind of began during COVID. But I think it's gotten a little bit of traction here, and I'm happy for that. I just as soon be a customer of a small business than large corporations. They don't need my dollar, but the small ones do. But we have some other interesting problems that may be bubbling to the surface when it comes to small business. So, Bruce, thanks so much for carrying the baton for small business. But more than that, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, thank you very much, Denise. It's great to be here.
For a very long time, small businesses has been the backbone of employment. They, what's the term that they employ more people than large corporations. Did I get that right?
They employ about half the workforce. Most importantly, they create 2/3, sometimes 90% of all net new jobs. So they truly are the engine of our economy.
So with that being said, we really should be lifting as many regulations off a small business, regardless of what industry they represent. And we should do things like nurture them as much as possible for success. Or we can do oversight, but I wouldn't necessarily have stipulations to, the loans that they get and that kind of thing. What say you?
Well, I agree. They need all the encouragement they can get. And let me put some basic facts on the table, which will help us appreciate our small businesses. We are a small business nation. We've got 36 million small businesses, which are 99.9% of all businesses in America. 99.9% are small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And all the rules and regs that could be really lifted from their shoulders, everything that could help them would directly affect the middle class economy, the Main Street economy, where half the workforce works. And unfortunately, we see the federal government does next to nothing for small businesses. You mentioned the loans. It's very, very common for people to think of the SBA's loans to small businesses when they think of what does the federal government primarily do for small businesses. Well, a couple of distinctions. The SBA backs loans that local providers will grant to small businesses if such an application is approved by the SBA, which is nice. But only about 0.2% of all of our small businesses ever get a loan backed by the SBA. 0.2%. So when every president brags about the loans and every administrator of the SBA brags about the loans, they don't tell you that. And our primary focus at the American Small Business League, our site is ASBL.com, and then we can go back and forth with questions and a deeper analysis. Our main focus is to expose the fact that the federal contracts that are supposed to go to small businesses, 23% of all federal contracts are supposed to go to small businesses, don't. Even though every year the SBA says, oh, we met that goal, we surpassed that goal. Our 100+ legal victories over 35 years, and then we got organized 20 years ago, but our founder, Lloyd Chapman, began suing the SBA, the Pentagon, the Department of Energy, NASA, to find out who are these quote-unquote small businesses you're giving these contracts to, plus dozens of congressional investigations and Inspector General reports from the SBA itself has found that the majority of all contracts go to big businesses, up to 96, 97% of all federal contracts go to the 0.1% of businesses that are big businesses. It's a ripoff of epic proportions. The cherry on that horrible cake is those big businesses don't create one new job to perform the work of those contracts. They're already big, whereas small businesses would create about 2 million new jobs if they got the contracts that they are supposed to. On top of the 2 million new jobs America creates typically every year anyway, an economic boom. Now we can talk about small businesses and what the federal government is doing for them.
Well, to validate your point, Mr. Bruce de Torres, is that I have been on this whole debacle, this whole maybe scam's not even the right word, but the export-import bank, because they're supposed to be only doing small business. And yet I wouldn't say Boeing is necessarily a small business. But with that being said, what constitutes a small business? Is that the revenue, the number of employees, square footage of a building? What what are what are those stipulations?
The way things are right now is it's a complex and confusing fog, intentionally so, which perpetuates the big corporations getting the vast majority of federal contracts, because the different federal agencies have different stipulations and permissions to say, well, in this industry, we can give a small business contract to a company that has 1,000 employees, 2,000 employees. Because it's that industry, they can be that big. And we say that's part of the problem. That's part of the shell game. That's part of the fog that allows contracts go to huge corporations and be called small business contracts. Here's where we start. Right now, generally, the federal government says a small business is up to 500 employees. We think that's ridiculous, because the 98% of all businesses in America have less than 100 employees. The average small business has 4 to 6 employees. Of the 36 million small businesses, 26, 27, 28 million of them are just the owner, non-employer firms, just the owner. And of our 36 million small businesses, Denise, 90% of them, 32 million, are in industries from that the federal government buys goods and services from, meaning 32 million businesses could apply for federal contracts. And just like the small amount of small businesses that get loans, it's the same with federal contracts. Every year, about 0.2%, about 80,000 small businesses get federal contracts. So for decades, the federal government has been captured by the giant corporations, and no president, Republican or Democrat, no SBA administrator tells the truth about this.
Several years ago, back when I was in the corporate world in the telecom industry, we used to have something called venture capitalists, venture capital investors, or angel investors. Then there was I think what necessarily replaced venture capitalists or venture capital were incubation centers. And I remember being in Atlanta that there was a fairly sizable center that WSB Media, TV, and whatnot had put some money forth in or invested in for a small business. And this was kind of the beginning of the whole .com thing. So it was, for small business, it was, people from universities or nonprofits or government agencies. They would, interview people and help them with mentorship or training, or even give them space or networking or, business support in the world of incubators. And I thought that was a tremendous idea, and it worked for a while, and then it just sort of collapsed. And I would argue today is a very good day to start that again, to have incubation centers. What say you?
Well, I would, because there are some nice provisions in the recent One Big Beautiful bill. The extension of the 20% deduction for, I think it's the qualified business income. That's very, very nice, and some other things that encourage investment. But it's really just it's crumbs because of the unprecedented, gigantic investment in AI. and that amount of funding being steered to the biggest corporations who are salivating at the prospect in 5 or 10 years as AI continues to develop into capabilities we almost can't imagine right now. They're salivating at the growth that they believe that they could achieve. And that has nothing to, it's got very little to do with empowering small businesses. Yes, small businesses will be able to use AI for many, many things. Unfortunately, a lot of that is very likely to be employing less and less human beings. And small business, especially as we saw during the pandemic, mandated closing, boom. Okay, and I think something like a third of small businesses that closed never came back.
Never came back.
And right, and yet $5 trillion in aid was poured into the biggest companies.
Business.
Right. So the end of the worst case scenario, but lots is looking this way, Denise, is small businesses continuing to be squeezed out of existence, and the rest of us squeezed, if not into poverty, into doing with less and less and less. And, you know, the real worst case scenario is hordes and hordes of people needing some kind of universal basic income, which is another way to put the population on welfare, which is another way to absolutely command and control what they'll have to buy in order to keep qualifying for stuff like that. So that's what I see, just because of the history I've read and the kind of feeds that I get from independent researchers and economists and things that never get invited on the mainstream. The mainstream is not the source of good information for small businesses, because the mainstream are big businesses, and they serve that 0.1% that is using the United States government for its own purposes, its own enrichment, sucking up 90% of the wealth of the country into the hands of 1% or so. That my figure might not be right there, but it's a true point of the wealth disparity and how hard it is for regular Americans to survive these days.
So what is hurting small business from survivability? And there may not be a good answer to my question because of the various industries that they represent. But is it, from bigger successes, Bruce, is it generally because of federal, state, and local permitting or requirements or regulations or that kind of thing? And the reason I asked the question is there was a little place just not too far from me that wanted to open up a little restaurant, and they almost bailed out on it after 2 years because my town/county put so many requirements and permit demands that it almost became impossible to get by them all and have something left to open the restaurant business to start with. There's like these big headwinds, not only to start a small business, but to kind of stay in it, correct?
Yes, historically, new businesses are 90% of them fail in the first 5 years. But more recently, the story you just told, Denise, is typical of what we're seeing across the board. That whether it's local, state, or federal, the rules, regs, and requirements and licenses and permits and regulations are murderous. And we see it consistent with the big corporations invading and controlling and buying up more and more of Main Street, more and more of small businesses by private equity firms is really the category to
And
study
things happen
and
with
learn about.
farmers and ranchers. Yes.
Yep.
And
Oh,
their
yeah.
small
Yeah, yeah,
business.
yeah. When you follow the money and you follow the people who are pushing these policies, you get to the likes of Bill Gates and others who are really implementing the declared goals of the UN sustainability goals, the World Economic Forum, and the World Health Organization in terms of how they want to make food, how they want to control the ingredients of food, how they want to eliminate independent farmers, how they are chemicalizing everything, my word. When you follow the trail, a great case could be made that it's a money go round that is not only controlling the production of food, it's forcing the production of illnesses,
The
which
supply chain
serves,
too. Mm-hmm.
yeah, right, because the agribusinesses, the food producers, are an arm of the oil industry, because its petroleum products have a large place in the fertilizers that grow our food, which have a large place in making us sick, which have a large place in the medications that get prescribed to manage our care, not cure us, but just profit from managing our illnesses for our entire lifetime. And you wrap that up with how generations of children are sicker and sicker and sicker, younger and younger and younger, and you see a profit-making monster aided and abetted by the federal government that throws me back onto my spiritual beliefs and ideas and fantasies for the fuel and the hope and the cheerfulness to go on.
Okay. um, s- so going back to my venture capital incubation concepts, I don't think we're going to have that in New York. Certainly with the new upcoming mayor.
Mm-hmm.
But so the attraction can be to some of these other states is to step in and show once again that venture capitalism and incubation centers for small business and encouraging maybe a handful of industries to do such, to those that may be helping out farmers or those that may be helping to fix the education system or the healthcare system, the things that are typically more broken, industries that are more broken than others. Seems to me is a missing proposition here and a needed proposition. Do you agree with that?
I do. That would fan the fire of especially young people's ambitions, who
Yes,
are not as old and jaded and cynical like I am.
I
But
am too.
yeah, but we have to rely on, it's almost not their innocence, but it's just their energy and their point in life to try a lot, to pool resources or to come together in such centers and say, by hook or by crook, we're going to find a way. And young people do. They find ways to zig and zag and go sideways that older generations just don't imagine, and that's the way it's ever been, and that's the good news. And I want to mention real quick, along these lines, a resource called the Brownstone Institute. Have you heard of them?
I think I have, but go help me with that one.
Brownstone.org, founded by Jeffrey Tucker in response to the outrageous imposition and tyranny and oppression of our rights during the pandemic. And on their YouTube channel are the videos of a recent conference they had called The Great Transition. And I think it was day one, the first panel were three economists who were talking about a lot of the things that we're talking about here. And there's a lot of insight and there's a lot of hope, because we have to first diagnose the problem accurately, to do
Yes,
a threat assessment
yes.
before we can imagine solutions that could help us. So brownstone.org, and find them on YouTube, and their conference called The Great Transition. It's a number of videos, and I think it was day one that had those economists.
We have a lot of headwinds here that prevent, great things from being researched and developed and launched and successful. But there is a kind of a documentary that was done back in 2017, and it was the Afghan girls robotics team. There were a handful of girls that got together secretly, I might add, to create a team of all girls from Afghanistan to build robots. And they had to sneak out of the country to go to these global competitions and whatnot. And they won several things. Now, these girls were ages from like 12 to 18. So I mention that because we don't have those kind of headwinds here. But if those girls could do this in a secretive manner and be able to travel and not only prevail, but win some of these competitions, imagine what we could do likewise in the STEM world, or encouraging Gen Z, Gen X, Gen whatever, that there are places, legitimate places, that are all too happy to, partner with you in these concepts for small business. What say you?
Absolutely. And you just reminded me why reasons to be cheerful. Reality is on our side because
Yes.
existence exists and it grows and it reproduces. That's just what nature does. And the human spirit and imagination, to the degree that it's free, has the imagination to solve all our problems. We have to believe that.
Well, I think that you're doing that. And so I hope you get a lot more traction and continued traction with the American Small Business League. Fascinating conversation. And I do invite you to come back because maybe you and I can get some more traction here and I'll take your lead. So, Bruce, thank you very much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way. Stay with us.